Generation Alpha was born during Pluto and Capricorn. So a lot of them are going to be really about business and very business minded. Um, so I really think they're going to be the future leaders. They're going to be the future leaders of society. I already said this before. Gen Z, not so much. Hey, what's up, guys? This is your spiritual advisor, Mantra Bible. I do videos about tarot and astrology and how it relates to society and makes when I make my predictions, basically. So, thank you for joining me. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe, and if you are a subscriber, you know I love you because you are one of the children of the sun. So, anyways, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Just going to be kind of just ranting about or reacting to a video that I saw, and I said, okay, this is about Generation Z, the Zoomers. Let's see what it's about.
And I saw a thread that was quite interesting. The title was, "What's it like being in your 20s in the UK these days?" And even if you're not in the UK or 20s, I bet you'll be able to relate to the top answer. Let me read it out for you. What's the point? I'm renting and I would love to buy a house, but what's the point? I'll likely never pay it off. I'm paying loads into a pension, but what's the point? I'm going to be working until I die. I'd like to see a doctor about some minor ailments, but
Wow, this already sounds kind of pessimistic already. I mean, I get it. I don't want to buy a house until I could find somewhere where I actually want to live forever. I be that Gen Z is like two generations below me, and they kind of feel that way. It's just kind of the way the world is. I think, but I can kind of get how they can feel about this kind of thing. Let me go.
but what's the point? There's never any appointments anyway. If you couldn't tell, this is going to be a video that is brimming with optimism.
Sounds like it.
But I think there's an important message to be made here. If you've clicked on this, I'm going to assume that to at least some degree you can relate to the sentiment that this user has posted. In fact, I came across a study that found that over half of young people agree with the statement that humanity is doomed. And if I wanted to convince you otherwise,
I don't know if we're doomed. Uh, I think society as we know it is going to end, and Gen Z is going to be the ones to end it because a lot of them just are not in a good mind frame.
could tell you that child mortality has dropped by half in the last 20 years, or any other bunch of random stats, but I don't think they actually convey anything helpful for most of us. I want you to stick with me for the next few minutes because I think we can actually go in a more useful direction. And on the off chance that the random Reddit user FroyoFlashy6048 is watching this one's for you, bro. So the sentiment expressed in that comment is hardly something uncommon, and just like absolutely everything that my generation has done, they've turned it into a meme. The meme is called the Doomer.
So Gen Z has gone from being the Zoomers to the Doomers. I'm gonna need some more wine for this. Hold on, I'll be right back. Okay, what did I miss? Let's get this party started.
Presumably, some of you aren't chronically online and aren't entirely familiar with the Doomer. And so I want to give you a definition as described by one of my favorite channels on YouTube, Pursuit of Wonder. The Doomer is an individual who's in their early 20s. He or she is someone who feels a sense of aimlessness or loneliness and is consequently stricken with a deep despair for life.
I noticed that Gen Z, they not only do they have a pessimistic attitude towards life, but I think I don't know, there seems to be an issue with a lot of identity or self-love. And maybe it's because they grew up with the internet. And with the internet, it can be such a cold place. So you don't have a lot of real relationships. It's just a bunch of people online, and then people can be really mean online. So I just find that Gen Z um, tends to be a little bit more disconnected. So I think to remedy that, they need to get out of the house more. I mean, most of them are born with Pluto and Sagittarius, and there is a need to, with Sagittarius energy, you have to travel more. You have to get out more. The most successful Gen Zers are the ones who travel the world and say, "Screw this! I'm just going to travel the world. I'm not going to get a 9 to 5 job. I'm going to get a remote job and just be everywhere."
For the Doomer, life is meaningless, and the world is inevitably doomed by humanity's ignorance, greed, and futility. As a result, the Doomer sees little to no reason in engaging in traditional pursuit, and retreats from society into apathetic isolation.
Mm.
Now, if this description is at all relatable to you, as it was for me, then I want you to stick with me for the next few minutes, because understanding a little bit about why this phenomenon is so prevalent nowadays might give you a few tools in your arsenal to help you deal with these feelings.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
So, brief aside, there are a lot of people in the world right now who are materially affected by quite tragic circumstances. And I'm not aiming to invalidate anyone who does feel that way. What I want to focus on is instead a sense of disillusionment, a feeling of disconnection from the social environment that a lot of people feel right now.
It's the internet. I already told you that. That's why they feel disconnected. You can't live 24/7 on the internet.
And I'd like you to keep that in mind when watching the rest of this. Okay, thanks.
So, if I asked you, why has a generation in the face of these gigantic issues chosen to give up en masse? You might give a few different answers.
The internet.
Some of you might say something like this. Well, people these days just don't want to work for what they want. This generation has just decided to choose the easy way out instead of facing the struggles head
Welfare? Is that the easy way?
on. To which I would say, well, why do we assume that giving up is the easy option? Let's try listening, and maybe we might reach a different conclusion entirely.
I find it very difficult to say that doomerism is an easy way out when it's not really a way out of anything. It doesn't relieve any particular individual of the stress and the trauma of human behavior at large, and I don't think it necessarily frees you from anything. This angle, I feel, is most often brought forward by people from a different generation who fundamentally had a different contract between them and society at large. People who lived a large part of their young adulthood through a time of optimism, a time where it seemed...
I won't say that. Now, I'm Gen X. So I was a teenager in the 90s, a kid in the 80s. And I would say Gen X is pretty pessimistic too. Like if you think about that doom and gloom, I mean, if you've seen The Breakfast Club and the whole emo thing, like my generation, we had some dark periods too. And it just could be just a phase of being 20 in your early 20s. Life is confusing. And I think most young people, when they're in their 20s, think like, this is going to be everything. This is life. But I think it's only because this period of time sucks. It's kind of like we're in a Great Depression. And so to grow up, even though they won't say it, but it is because things used to be cheaper and people used to be a whole lot happier. But I think 20 or when you're in your 20s, things just seem bad. And that's rightfully so because you're an adult, but you don't have adult power.
Like hard work would actually genuinely be rewarded. What I think we see when we look at doomers is a group of people who feel one of two ways: misled or powerless. It's a group of people that is bombarded with messaging that tells them that their efforts are futile. They feel like the contract between society and them has been broken irreversibly, and thus there's nothing we can do but resign ourselves. And so I don't think it's fair to characterize doomerism as a choice necessarily, as a conscious decision to give up and choose ease of life, because it's not any easier than any other mode of life. Rather, it's a mindset.
When you give up ease of life, like I said, that sounds like welfare. And if the government is controlling your money, it ain't easier.
Mindset that one develops after losing the so-called naive optimism you might have as a younger person. And some of you might agree with that. Some might even take the idea further and say something like this.
Okay, so I get what you're saying. It sounds to me like doomerism and apathy are almost like a rational response.
What are these shirts they're wearing? I don't know. This sounds very scripted.
Why would anyone bother caring when facing these issues such as climate change and retirement? It seems to me like the sensible, rational thing to do is to give up, right?
And at one point in my life, I would have agreed with this. But lucky for me, you're allowed to change your mind. I would even encourage it. See, I believe that most people in my age group are genuinely passionate about certain things. We do face this issue, however, that we are constantly told that our efforts are futile. And in such an environment, the overwhelmingly sensible thing to do seems to be not bother. But I don't necessarily think that that's an inherently rational way to respond. In fact, when it comes to human behavior, rationality is the exception rather than the rule. And I think keeping that in mind is really important when it comes to challenging thought patterns that can be unhelpful to you. The idea of rationality in human decision making was kind of the motivation for this entire piece, specifically the work of Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist who specializes in that area. His most famous piece
This guy's smart. I'm gonna have to go look that up.
of work is probably the book Thinking Fast and Slow. And in it, there's one specific idea that I wanted to share. I actually came across Thinking Fast and Slow in a bookshop recently, and it got me thinking about the subject of rationality. I'd read the book years ago, but thanks to today's sponsor, Shortform, I was able to get a really quick overview
Come on, advertisement.
of the thing you perceive it to be. When we're surrounded by information that's designed to make us feel powerless, then naturally we resign ourselves to feeling powerless. But there is another thing worth noting, and that's that time and time again, the people who have had the most impact, the people who've been heralded as leaders of movements, have been those who've behaved in a way that's inherently irrational. Their behavior would only ever really make sense in retrospect. Now, I'm not saying that me or you is going to be able to solve huge systematic inequalities within our lifetimes.
A lot of times, though, I think, especially with this generation coming up, yeah, there's inequalities, but at the same time, I think they focus so much on the inequalities, it just exasperates. Is that the word? I don't even know. But it becomes even more because this is what you're focused on. You're focused on inequality, then there's more inequality. Where as I think we got to a point where everyone's equal, at least in America. I think we need to focus maybe on inequality in other areas, but then again, that's those countries and how they do things. But as for America, I say we're pretty equal here. I think it's the idea that, yeah, you can't convince everybody of an idea. There are going to be some people who will always think they're better than somebody else, and that's no matter race or gender or whatever. People are always going to think they're more than they are, and that's just more narcissism than anything. And yes, and that sometimes they will say it's because they are part of some particular group, and that makes them special. But I digress.
We have no ability to predict the impact of our behavior throughout and beyond our lifespan. What we do have an ability to do, though, is to commit to values that we believe to be true and to focus on seeing those values represented in people immediately around us. Whenever the kind of doomer mindset tries to come back to me, I do remember the fact that, for the most part, most people will not be remembered for their actions. But that does not mean that their actions do not have lasting consequences.
And there's another extreme and another thing, me being an old man. A lot of stuff when people with Gen Z focusing on like the doom and gloom, that's also a lack of spirituality. Not to say they're all like that, no. But a good majority of them maybe have rejected all types of things because they rejected religion. They really didn't replace it with anything. Uh, Nor did they get deeper into the spirituality. Now, I will say that there are some YouTubers and TikTokers in Gen Z that are highly spiritual, and I'm like blown away by their knowledge. But of course, I feel like this generation should be the most knowledgeable because of the history of knowledge that they have to pull from, and everything's online. I grew up in the time we had to have encyclopedias.
I would, for example, challenge you to name more than, say, 10 people who are actively involved in the civil rights movement. And yet, it took the collective effort of millions of people to bring about change.
That's right.
And I think that's true for any issue that you care about. The people whose impact ends up affecting change are those who behave in a way that we would deem irrational.
I think though Gen Z is trying to change everything. Everything. And it's like, okay, we don't need to change that. That's fine. Like, and for example, look at all the movies. Everything is getting rebooted and being changed just because I don't like it. I don't like it. Make up your own movie.
Because what humans would describe as rationality, I think, is more analogous to just talking about the status quo. We believe that whatever exists makes sense. I, for a long time, was a doomer, but I do think that things are starting to change. I'm starting to
Focus
see
on
the
the
value
positive.
of adding my voice to a collective and accepting that it doesn't matter really whether or not that voice is actually heard. What matters is that I've made a concerted effort to make it heard within the people who are immediately around me. And that approach to life has made me a lot less fearful.
And see, Pluto and Sagittarius are the Gen Z, and it is imperative for them to be optimistic because Sagittarius is optimistic. Um, and when they don't feel that, there is this kind of dark place because that's the dark side of Sagittarius. Like, if they need to be optimistic that everything's going to be okay, and that's the energy you have to embrace as that generation. You have to get a goal, focus on that goal, and say, this is going to happen. If you go focus on the doom, guess what you're going to create? You're going to manifest more doom. And we got plenty of that. But yeah, I see that a lot. That this generation, the young ones, well, they're not even the youngest, Generation Alpha, which I say they're going to be the ones that take over because the attitude that they're growing up with is a changing system of the monetary system and the government, stuff like that. These people, yeah, these little 13-year-olds down to the newborns are going to be the future leaders. The millennials will take over stuff. Gen X doesn't care. We do have a lot of 40-year-olds in government right now, but it seems like the Gen Zs that are in government are making their voice heard because I think they know how to use social media way better. But that's neither here or there.
Living by values that you believe to be true is the only power I think we have. And no matter how rough or how bad things feel like they're going to be, it's a power that you'll always have.
Did I say Gen Z or I said millennials? Millennials have a lot of power. Gen X has some. I think the millennials and Generation Alpha are going to be those people, those political people. Gen Xers, I don't know. We're kind of like the hippies of today. Sometimes I feel like that, like a lot of us. Um, we're, but that's kind of what we grew up with. Anywho, I do sense like with Gen Alpha, there was this video I saw with some of the kids now, 13-year-olds, because they're starting to get on social media, and they are something else. But either way, um, with Gen Z, they're going to be their own worst enemy, and it comes from a place of believing in yourself, believing in who you are. A lot of them don't even know who they are, but that's okay because they're in their 20s. You're not supposed to have it all figured out in 20s, but I think a lot of them do kind of feel like they need to. And they look at trying to see a future and trying to save the world. Sagittarius things, trying to save the world and just let things happen. Such a Gen X thing to do. Passive. Just let things happen. We'll be okay. All right, guys. I'm gonna head out of here and check out some other stuff. Leave me a comment below on what you think about Gen Z right now and these future babies coming up with Gen Alpha.